All right, here's the last video going over 14 through 16 on the review. And when trying to write an equation, solve real life problems, try to think about what you would do if you knew all the numbers. So for example, if I'm going to buy 3 $10 shirts and I'm going to buy 4 $5 pairs of socks, and I know I'm going to have to pay, I'm going to get a total for that and pay maybe 6% tax. And then I know what my dollar amount is. So, you know, in real life, I'd buy this, enter, they charge tax on it, and they give me some bill, okay? So in real life, try to think about that's the process. So what if you don't know what the shirts cost, okay? So I don't know they're $10. Well, the only thing is then that's your variable. But the rest of the math stays the same. So I would still take 3 times the price, but it's a variable. I still know I have my 4 $5 items, and I'm still going to know my dollar amount over here. And then I can go backwards and solve for x. So you try to think about what math you would do. So if you're stuck, make up a number and do the math with a number, and then just replace that number with a variable, okay? So let's look at the first one here. So I spent $28 on a restaurant. I'm going to buy a $6 drink. I'm going to buy a meal. And let's see, I know I'm going to spend $28 total, including everything. I have 6% tax, so 106% including the meal, and a 20% tip, so 120%, and we're going to tip on the tax as well, just to make the math a little easier. So in real life, if you're struggling with this, think about, okay, I had an $8 meal. So I take 8 plus 6 and get 14, take 106% of that to get tax, take 120% of that to get the bill, which obviously isn't $28 because you're just guessing, but it gives you the idea of what math to do. Now, at this point, you kind of have 2 ways to solve it. One way is to do order of operations backwards. So the last thing we did here is multiply by this, so we could divide by that. The second to last thing we did is that, so divide by that. And then do the subtracting first. Because if you think of order of op, what would you do first if you knew what m is? You would add the 6, then you'd multiply by the 1.06, and then you'd multiply by the 1.20. So if you want to do order of op backwards, you're going to divide. So you're going to take, let's see, what do we have? You're going to take both sides. I'll just do it here and then erase it. You'll take both sides divided by the 1.20 and get an answer for that. And then you could take that answer, whatever it is, and divide both sides by 1.06, whatever answer you get for that, and divide that by 1.06. And so I've undone that. So now I get 6 plus m equals, and I think when I divided twice, I got 22.01. And then to get rid of adding 6, you subtract 6, because again, you're just undoing order of operations. So the meal is about 1601. Okay. Now, what's my other option? So my other option is to not do order of operations backwards, but to do the distributive property, because remember, properties can trump order of op. So again, you can't add percents. 20% and 6% do not make 26%. You have to multiply them, because you're getting a percent on a percent. So you could multiply those, and you're going to get 1.272. So it's really 27.2% instead of 26, because you're getting a percent on a percent. And then you have this. And again, we're just going to do the distributive property. If you wanted to divide at that point to undo that, you could. I mean, that's an option too. If I distribute, I get 7.632, 1.272m equals 28. And then now I want my variables on one side, numbers on the other. So I want this guy to go away. I want just m's and numbers. So to get rid of adding, you subtract. All right, these guys cancel. So you get 1.272m equals, I get 20.368. And then there's no more adding or subtracting. So everything, variables on one side, numbers on the other. So then this is where you divide both sides to solve. So then I get m, and I get obviously the same answer as I got before. So $16 and a penny, right? So again, think of how you do it forwards and then move it backwards. All right, if you haven't tried 15 already and 16, try those, and we'll talk about those next. I'm going to pause for just a second. Okay, so you like to go to Cafe X all the time over by Trail Point, and so you have a $200 budget. and so forth. Okay, so think about in real life, the coffee costs what, $2.89? Where's my pens? $2.89. So say you're like, oh, maybe I'll buy 20 cups this school year. And let's see, do you have to pay tax on that? Yep, 6% tax. So you're like, okay, well, I'm going to have to pay 6% tax on that. And then you hit enter and you're like, okay, how much money is that going to be? And then you're like, no, maybe I can buy more than 20. So I'm going to try $2.89 and maybe I'm going to buy 30 of them. But I still have to pay tax on all of that as well. And you get a budget. And then you're like, oh, maybe I can spend more than that. And so I have 6%, the price of the coffee. And then notice that the only thing that's changing is not the price of the coffee, and it's not the tax rate. The only thing that's changing is your number, how many cups of coffee you have. So that's called a variable because it varies. I might buy 20, I might buy 30, I might buy 40. So if you get a feel for it, then you're like, oh, that's my variable. Okay, so I don't know how many cups of coffee. And if you want to use C instead for cups of coffee, you can if you want to. But the price never varies. I know what that is. And so does the tax. And then, so what I do know is what else? Well, I decide I'm going to leave, a one-time tip of $20. Okay, so since I go there all the time, I'm going to just give them $20. And I know that I have a budget of $200. Okay, so I have my tip money, and maybe you divvy it up, but it says a one-time tip. So you're just going to tip them, and then I guess the rest of the year just go. So what math do we do here? So I want to get rid of order of op backwards. So again, first you would multiply and then add. So to undo it, you're going to, so you would multiply first and then you would add last. But we are doing order of op backwards. So I want to get rid of adding 20. So I'm going to subtract 20, which makes sense because you really have $180 budgeted for coffee. The rest was tip. All right, and then it's up to you. You can, at this point, you can either combine these, but again, you can't add percents, or these aren't even percents. Well, this one's a percent, this one's money. But you can multiply them to create what would be the cost of a cup of coffee with the tax included. Or to get rid of, you could do order of op backwards on these, and you could say, okay, well, I'm going to divide twice. So I'm going to take 180 divided by this guy, and then get that answer, divide by that guy to undo it twice. If you do that, then you're just going to have C. Like, that's going to be your answer. But I went ahead and multiplied these to get the price of the coffee with tax included, subtracted my tip. No more adding or subtracting, so to undo multiplying, I would divide. And so then I'm like, okay, how many cups? So it looks like I can buy 58 cups of coffee. And now I rounded down, it was 58.7, so I rounded down to make sure I had enough money. Again, could I sit here and guess and test? So could I try 20, 30, then try 40, and then try 50, and then try 60, and then go back down to 59 and 58? I could, but it's a lot faster just to know my budget, subtract, divide to figure out, what I can really afford. All right, pause it, and then we'll do the last one, number 16. All right, so our number 16, it says if you're going to go to your friend's house, you would walk what? So you would start out 3 blocks east, and then after that, you're going to go 4 blocks north. So in real life, if you're doing this forward, that's great. But if you do this again to get home, obviously that's not going to happen. So if you want to undo, then what you have to do is you're going to have to do the opposite thing in the reverse order. So if you went, the last thing you did was to go 4 blocks north, you are going to have to start going 4 blocks south. And you're going to have to do that first. Then, at that point, instead of going 3 blocks east, you're going to have to go 3 blocks west, and that's going to be the second thing you do. And that's going to get you back to where you started from. So, if you want to solve an equation, it's the same idea. You're undoing the math. So, if you add 2x plus 4 equals 10, so if you knew x is 3, you would multiply first, add the 4, and get an answer. But the problem is you don't know what x is. So it's kind of like this. You're going backwards. So think about if you were going forwards. right? What would be the first thing? If you knew what x was, you'd multiply by 2 first, and then you would add 4. But the problem is we don't know what x is, but we're at the end. We know the answer. So we're going to go backwards, and instead of adding 4, we're going to subtract 4 first. And instead of multiplying by 2, we're going to divide 2. So if I subtract the 4 first, I get what? 2x equals 6. And if I divide by 2 next, I get x equals 3. And notice, if I knew x was 3, what math would I do? Well, I'd shove it in there, and I would multiply by 2 first, which would give me 6, and then I'd add 4 later to get 10. And so when you're solving equations, what you're really doing is you're undoing order of operations. That's why you get rid of add and subtract first, and you do multiply and divide next. All right, that's the end of the review. And so study hard, and good luck on the exam.